Hello. So this is chapter 1 of Driver's Ed. This is my first go at this, so hopefully it works out well. You should be able to follow along in the book. It's been uploaded to Canvas, and then you could download it to your Chromebook. So you could follow along in the book, have me just running in the background where you can hear me, or if you can split screens, whatever works for you. Monday we'll do an open book test for chapter 1, and that will be open from 9:30 to 10 o'clock. And so you'll just go on Canvas, find Driver's Ed, chapter 1, and then you'll take the test. At the end of the discussion today, I will give you a little assignment that you can type in and send to me, and we'll just get started, and hopefully it works well. So I'm on page 3. It's the start of chapter 1. It's titled You Are the Driver. Lesson 1.1, You Are Part of the System. The key to becoming a safe and responsible driver is to learn about the risks of driving and how to manage them. No matter how good a driver you become, the possibility of injury to people and damage to property or vehicles is always present. So I'm just going to read through a few highlighted things. I won't read the whole chapter. The next one is the HTS, or Highway Transportation System. It has 3 parts: roadway users, vehicles, and the roadway itself. The purpose of the HTS is to move people and cargo from one place to another in a safe and efficient manner. Roadway users, people who use the HTS by walking, driving, or riding, are called roadway users. There are more than 240 million registered passenger vehicles in the United States. To be a safe driver, you must learn how to share the road with vehicles whose size and weight add to the risk of the driving task. Regulating the HTS, there are federal, state, and local government agencies work together to regulate the HTS. The federal government passed 2 laws to set standards for vehicle and highway safety: the National Highway Safety Act and the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act. By passing the National Highway Safety Act, the federal government created guidelines for motor vehicle safety programs, included in the guidelines that states must follow are vehicle registration, driver licensing, traffic courts, and highway construction and maintenance. To keep cars safe, the federal government passed the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act, which requires automakers to install certain safety features into each car. For example, the act requires that safety belts be installed at the factory. Okay, lesson 1.2 is your driving task. The driving task includes all of the mental, social, and physical skills that are required to drive. To perform the driving task with low risk, you must develop habits for using knowledge and visual skills, judging speed, time, and space, anticipating how your car will respond under ordinary and emergency conditions. Under mental skills, safe, low-risk driving involves critical judgment and continuous monitoring. Social skills. All drivers bring their own problems and skill levels to our driving world. Like all social tasks, driving requires you to interact with other people. A big part of your driving task will be applying social skills to stressful situations to avoid conflict. Physical skills. Skills such as smooth use of acceleration and braking and steering controls are examples. Scanning your rearview mirror every few seconds. You'll need to develop eye-hand coordination so that you will acquire the habit of using the controls effectively. This book talks a lot about the IPDE process. That stands for Identify, Predict, Decide, and Execute. And you can read through those 4 things at what each one is. The zone control system, which is a method of managing space around your car. Understanding zone control will help you apply the IPD process. I think later it'll mention what those zones are. Once you have mastered the IPD process, you'll be able to practice low-risk driving. Lesson 1.3, so your driving responsibilities. Driving is a privilege given to an individual who meets certain requirements determined by state law. As with any privilege, driving has responsibilities. You have legal responsibilities. Your primary responsibility as a driver is to obey all traffic laws. Collisions or crash happens when a vehicle hits another object, whether the object is moving or not. By law, any driver involved in a collision must stop. So I typically ask my class a question: what is the difference between an accident and a crash or a collision? And since we're not to the level of having you respond, I'll just give you the answer. So a crash or a collision is something that, for the most part, could have been avoided. That means if you were speeding, if you were texting, if you were drinking and driving, anything like that where something caused you to crash, you could have avoided that by slowing down, not texting, not drinking, versus an accident, which is typically unavoidable. Say you're driving along and you blow a tire, and that causes you to go off the road. That would be considered an accident. You also have financial responsibilities. So there's some operating costs to driving a car, which include fuel, oil, and tires. Fixed costs, the purchase price of the car, licensing fees, and your insurance. And we'll talk about insurance later as well. So those are fixed costs. Crash costs, all of the possible causes for a collision. Driver error is the most common. Traffic crashes cost our nation billions of dollars each year in property damage, time away from work, and medical fees. Auto insurance is designed to cover the majority of those costs. There's also environmental responsibilities to reduce pollution and preserve our environment. Responsible drivers can buy and maintain fuel-efficient vehicles, use fuel-efficient driving habits. That means don't drive like you're in a hurry. Use carpools and public transportation, recycle used materials, and work for strong policies that encourage energy-efficient driving. As a driver, it is your responsibility to make driving decisions that show respect for yourself as well as for others. So you, your passengers, and other people out on the road, or pedestrians on the sidewalk. Driving can be a social event if your friends are in the car. Friends might try to pressure you to engage in risky activities that can affect your ability to drive safely. So don't give in to peer pressure. Number 4, graduated driver licensing program, or GDL. They require young drivers to progress through a series of licensing stages. Typically, these programs have 3 stages: learner's permit, intermediate licensing, and full driving privilege. So the learner permit, which most of you are at, the learner receives a permit to drive when supervised by an adult licensed driver. So you get your permit, you can drive with somebody who has a license, like your parents. The permit must be held for a minimum period. So in Utah, it is 6 months. So you have to hold that for at least 6 months. Other licensed drivers, such as family members, may be asked to provide a minimum number of hours of practice driving. So in Utah, you have to have 40 hours of practice driving, 10 at night. The 6 with an instructor can count towards that 40. Then you move on to the intermediate stage. So this one, you would have your license, but you're restricted for the first 6 months where you cannot drive with any friends. You can still drive with parents, you can have siblings in the car, or you can drive alone, but that first 6 months you are not supposed to drive with friends. And there's a restriction on nighttime driving as well. And then full privilege, so you would then be able to take friends, drive pretty much any time. And you can see the pictures at the top of page 12 there, the typical ages and requirements there. In the United States that have adopted elements of graduated licensing, the safety benefits are evident. Almost all studies have found crash reductions from about 10 to 30%. Driving is primarily a decision-making process. Your driving will be greatly influenced by your maturity, emotions, and attitude toward responsibility. And awareness of the limiting factors for yourself, your vehicle, will make you a low-risk driver. Drugs and alcohol will impair your ability to be a low-risk driver. After you have driven under a wide variety of traffic situations and road conditions, such as night driving, hazardous weather, you can begin to think of yourself as an accomplished driver. And that's the basis behind why Utah students used to get their permits or learner permit at 15 and a half, but they moved it to 15 with the hopes that you would be able to drive in all kinds of weather conditions. Remember, the best drivers never stop learning. Okay, organ donor program. The most important step in considering organ donation is discussing your decision with your family. Let me just take a quick minute here on this one. So a lot of students don't think that's a good idea. They don't want, somebody else using their parts. A couple of things to think about. One is that the majority of people who die in a car crash or any other way are not in a position to be a donor. You have to be in a hospital when you die in order for that to happen. And so real quick on a personal note, I have a sister who smoked for a good portion of her life, and she was having emphysema, lung problems, breathing problems, and went to a hospital in Phoenix. They put her on a donor list, and after about 9 months, she received a set of lungs from a person that had passed away, and she's now in much better health because of that. So it can help people if that's a decision you want to make. Implied consent laws. When you get your driver's license, you agree that if you are stopped for cause and charged with drinking and driving, you consent to having a police officer give you a test for the presence of alcohol. If you refuse to take the test, you will lose your license. So that's chapter 1. I'm trying to be quick so it doesn't go on, and hopefully it's somewhat interesting. If you have questions, I guess you could send those to me. So over on page 16, so the assignment that I would ask you to do is titled Checking Concepts, lesson 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so it's questions 8 through 14. So the question will be there, and then you just put in your response to that. So that will be your assignment. Typically what I do on those is, I call it required extra credit. So you'll get 1 point, or it's worth 1 point, but if you do it, you get 3 points. And that equals about 10% of the test. So, all right, let me just finish by reading on page 17. These questions, they're called preparing for the test. So I'll read the question and then give you a second to think about it, and then I'll give you the answer. Number 1, which of the following is part of the Highway Transportation System, or the HTS? And that would be D, all of the above. Number 2, it's important to learn low-risk driving habits so that you can, and the answer is C, actively avoid dangerous driving situations. 3, if you hold a learner permit, you can drive, and that is D, only with a licensed adult driver. 4, the operating costs of driving include, and that would be D, fuel and tires. 5, this sign is important for drivers because B, drivers have a responsibility to preserve our environment. 6, if you're involved in a collision by law, you must D, stop. That would be called a hit and run, and that is against the law, whether it's property, whether it's somebody's car, a person. Don't hit and then flee the scene. That's a hit and run, and it is bad. And number 7, the most important action you should take before you sign this card is, and they recommend discussing it with your family. And 8, The National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act requires, and that would be D, automakers to install safety features in all cars. So, good luck, and we'll talk later. Thank you.